Okay, so hopefully this can be a shorter video. I don't have a lot of time, and I've just got a few things I wanted to cover from chapter 2. This is not at all like a summary of the whole chapter or anything like that. I wanted to talk about the section that's titled Family, a Buffer Against Mental and Physical Illness. There's a few points I wanted to make that are important to me. So here we go. Let's go through this. They talk about, okay, so remember the context here. Cox and Demmett are saying, family isn't as important as intimate relationships. What really matters is let's just focus on intimate relationships because they're all the same, right? But then they do weird things like this. For example, they start talking about the benefits of marriage, not intimate relationships. The benefits of marriage for people, right? And this is one of the first things they start covering. They're going to give you, actually, it's on the top of page 42. The 130 empirical studies were reviewed, found that married men and women are generally happier and less stressed than the unmarrieds. Okay, so let me put this in perspective. What they're really saying is married people are happier than cohabitating people. Married people are happier than divorced people. Married people are happier than widowed people. So there's something about intimacy that really matters, and you could certainly use marriage as an indicator of intimacy, but the whole idea of comparing married people to people who just live together and then saying, well, wait a minute, why would the married people be happier? They're both living together with someone and they have intimacy. They have human intimacy going on in their lives. Why would the married people be happier, right? That's the thing that they're not really addressing. And it's in the research, the studies that they're citing pointed that out. And so these guys are kind of like, again, playing loose and free with the facts there to hang on to their idea that what really matters is human intimacy and not actual marriage or family relationships. So anyway, here we go. Here's some stuff that we know about married people compared to other people, right? These are the benefits for marrieds. So for married people and their children have these benefits. So first of all, they have less stress in their lives. They report less stress. They experience less stress. They have stress tests, all that kind of stuff. They have less stress. They have less physical illness. They have less mental and emotional illness. Now, they brought that up in the textbook, less illness in general, but I just wanted you to know that it's both physical and mental or emotional illness. They have more wealth accumulation over their lifetime. So they're going to get more money and be in a better position economically over time. And hopefully that makes sense, right? Because they're like pulling their resources together. It's two people, maybe two incomes, or maybe one person is the breadwinner making all the money, but the other person is supporting that person so he can spend less time dealing with things like sick kids. He doesn't have to stay home, so he can just go and work and make lots of money because he's going to get promotions faster because he's working and putting in extra hours and all. So there's different strategies that couples can use to have economic advantage over single people, right? So more wealth accumulation. A better standard of living, obviously that goes along with more wealth accumulation. So they generally are going to enjoy a better standard of living. Married people generally have a better standard of living than single parents or single people in general. They report greater happiness in their lifetime, and they report a happier sex life. And that one is for the couple, not necessarily for the kids, but you get the idea. So there are a lot of advantages. So this idea that human intimacy matters and we need human intimacy and it's good for us, I totally agree with the authors, right? And the idea that it's not a surprise, it's nothing new. Like all Americans, when you ask Americans in general, there are a lot of big surveys where they ask them, are you currently married or would you like to be married? If you're not married, would you like to be married? In a long-term monogamous marriage. That's what we're talking about. And 90%, roughly 90% of all Americans either are married or would like to be married one day. So we know that marriage is good for us. We know that intimacy is good for us. We want it, and with good reason. It's not just like we're all stupid idiots who watch too many Disney princess movies or something like that, right? Anyway, the book mentioned this thing that I wanted to cover, which is the idea of a selection effect, which is, they kind of just made a quick reference to it on page 42 in the third complete paragraph. They said, research suggests that, this is the second sentence, research suggests that the benefits of marriage may be partially due to a selection effect and partially due to true benefits. Now, this is going to come up again, in the course, so I wanted to talk about this just for a moment. So to say that, married people are happier than single people, right? They have better health than single people. Well, some people will say, well, what if that might just be a selection effect? Who's more likely to get married? People who have better health or people who have worse health? Okay, you would think that people with better health are more likely to get married. Who's more likely to get married? A guy who makes a lot of money or a guy who makes hardly any money? I'm not saying women are all gold diggers, but the truth is that all else being equal, if a woman has a choice between this really great guy who is a lawyer and makes tons of money and this really great guy who wants to be an actor in Hollywood, and right now he's bussing tables and hoping to get his big break, right? Which one of those two guys is she more interested in? Assuming they're twins, and in every other way they're like the same guy. The guy who makes the more money has the better chance of actually getting the girl, right? So that's the selection effect idea. In other words, married people don't make more money than other people. It's just that they were already on a path to make more money. This guy was already in law school when he got married. Of course he was going to make more money. And the woman chose him in part because she expected that he would make more money. So it's a selection effect. In other words, it's when you're choosing who to marry, you select for things like health and wealth and happiness, right? That's the selection effect idea. But there's enough evidence to suggest that, yeah, some of it is a selection effect, but some of it is actual real benefit. In other words, like married people, okay, and here's the clincher, right? After a divorce, people lose these benefits in a big way. And in fact, they're the least likely to be happy, they're the most stressed, they're the most, so like, why would it be, if it was a selection effect, well, you were already going to make a lot of money anyway. Why would getting a divorce suddenly make you not be that wealthy person who's going to accumulate a lot of wealth and have all this, like, in other words, it's more than just the selection effect. There's something about pulling your resources together. There's something about being in a long-term committed monogamous relationship that's just good for us. And there's a lot of evidence to suggest that. Anyway, so let's just go on here. I wanted to talk a little bit about why I'm going back to the definitions issue. Now, in this chapter, you got a whole bunch of the stuff that we talked about in my video for chapter 1, where I talked about structure versus function and all that. I gave you all those arguments, and so you've already been exposed to them, and they're in chapter 2, and they hit on them pretty clearly. Hopefully that's okay. But I wanted to talk a little bit about why family is important as opposed to intimacy, and a little bit about how it relates to definitions. So in the book on page 41, there's this quote I took. It says, because of the potential for harm, it becomes even more important to understand how to create a strong and healthy family. Now, in my chapter 1 video, I pointed out the idea that in families, you have these little people who don't have the same cognitive resources and developmental abilities and things, so they're at risk for being abused and mistreated in ways. Adults are more powerful and can do things to these little people, these children, and the little children can't do anything to stop it. Or maybe in a family it might be that there's a woman and a man and she's physically weaker and he can beat her or whatever. Or she might, when women are pregnant, they're more vulnerable emotionally. There's all kinds of ways in which there are vulnerable people in families, and we should care and want to make sure that families operate well so that we can promote the greatest amount of good and minimize abuse and things like that, right? But there's another thing I wanted to talk about, which is the idea that we might be deinstitutionalizing family and marriage in America right now. So this is a second reason why it's important to deal with families and intimacy and all this stuff, right? So deinstitutionalizing family and marriage makes it harder to succeed and therefore reap the benefits of marriage. So I've just told you about all these benefits of marriage, and now I want to suggest that what we're doing in terms of how we define family and how we define marriage and the direction we're moving in, it might actually make it harder for people to succeed at marriage in the future. So here's a really, again, this is such a, this is an oversimplification of some very complicated ideas and theory and research, but I'm going to just give it to you quickly because I want to. So family as an institution. Most societies are generally orderly. This is one of the first things that sociologists notice when they go study societies. And this kind of bothers them, and they say, well, why is there so much order? So they come up with this idea of institutions. So sociologists explain the order that you generally observe in societies through the idea of an institution. So an institution is an organization or other formal social structure that governs a field of action. So there's an institution of family, there's an institution of marriage, and what we're really meaning is that there's social sanctions in place that govern your behavior and restrict your behavior. If you decide to get married, then society tells you this is how you should behave, right? So to say that the family or marriage is an institution is to say that it dictates and constrains the behavior of those who engage in it. So, for example, in our society, we say things to people like you shouldn't cheat on your husband. You know, you shouldn't be having a sexual affair with another man if you're married. Or within a family context, you shouldn't abuse your children. You shouldn't beat them. You shouldn't neglect them. You should provide for their food and shelter and medical care. Now, these are all social sanctions. These are all social pressures that we place on people in those institutions, where we send these clear messages to them about this is how you should behave and these are the things you should do. And it's not arbitrary, right? It's like these are the things you should do because these are the successful, this is what it means to succeed in this institution, right? So it's not like a bunch of random arbitrary, oh yeah, well, you should wear blue now that you're married. We're not talking about that. We're talking about if you don't cheat on your husband, you got a better chance of having your marriage last, right? For husbands, if you don't beat your wife, you have a better chance of having your marriage last. So this kind of information, this social knowledge that's going on in the institution, it's not arbitrary. It's actually directly relevant to succeeding within that institution, right? So, broadening our perspective a little, I want to talk about social norms and social roles. This is more the nuts and bolts of how institutions work. So, social norms are the means by which institutions dictate and constrain. People who do not follow the norms are shunned, or they're given other kinds of negative sanctions or negative feedback, leading to social consequences and possibly psychological consequences. You could be all stressed out or have low self-esteem or feel bad about yourself or whatever, right? Because you're not following the social norms, right? Now, a lot of times in contemporary society, we focus on the downside of that, of like a young man who is embracing his homosexuality and comes out to his friends, but then gets all this negative pressure and decides he wants to kill himself or something, right? And granted, that's an ugly part of social norms, is that they can do a lot of damage, right? But it's not all bad, and I'll get to that in a moment. Social roles are a particular set of behaviors expected of someone who holds a particular status or particular position. So this is the idea of like your role as a husband. So a role is a more specified version of a social norm. It's like, as a husband, you should provide for your children. You should take care of your wife and treat her well and keep her happy. You should, just whatever, the breadwinner role, things like that. I mean, there's different aspects of being a husband or a wife or being a father or a mother or whatever, right? So again, I was saying that the social norms aren't all negative. Because again, they do things like help people to not cheat on their spouses, right? Or they do things like help people to not beat their spouses. Social roles, it's the same idea. And I want to emphasize that social roles aren't arbitrary. The social role, because it has all these expectations built into it, this is how you should behave and these are the things you should do. And the social role also contains within it the knowledge that you need to succeed in that particular position or status. So, for example, a housewife back in the 40s might have learned, by the time she was 19 or 20 and getting married, she would have learned things like maybe like how to can her own produce or how to bake bread, or I mean, I guess you go back farther into the previous century before that, and that certainly would have been a part of the social role. Like, in other words, she would have had actual information and skills that she picked up growing up in that society that prepared her for that social role. And all that knowledge and all those skills and all that, that's the social role contains all of that. So it's not just the pressures, but the social role also contains the information and the skills and stuff that you need to actually succeed at that role. So there's an upside to social norms and there's an upside to social roles, right? So let's go on. Changing norms and roles versus deinstitutionalization. So now I want to take you back to that term that I threw out there and I didn't really explain it yet. So institutions, social institutions, social norms, social roles, they all change over time. This is normal. So sociologists study this stuff, right? What used to be a woman's role in a marriage back in the 40s is not at all the role that she has today, right? The roles change. We know that, right? But many sociologists believe that what we're seeing in contemporary society right now is not changing roles. It's not like, oh, roles are changing. Certainly roles are changing, but they're concerned that there might be something else going on, which is that maybe we are stripping away the norms. We are stripping away the information from the roles, right? So we are, in effect, deinstitutionalizing the family and deinstitutionalizing marriage. Now, it just so happened that this morning I was having a conversation with someone in a Relief Society presidency who told me about some of the struggles she's having with all these young marrieds from SVU that are in the ward who, like, there's a wife who doesn't know at all how to cook. There's a husband who doesn't know at all how to, like, hold down a job or whatever. There's these people that really don't understand marriage and they don't really get marriage because they don't really have the role and the norms and all that kind of stuff, right? That's just an example. But the bigger issue is this. If you think about that slide I showed you with all the benefits of marriage, right? If we deinstitutionalize marriage so that it's not really clear what a husband does or what a wife does or how a marriage should work, and marriage can really be anything, and it's just two people in love. That's it. Two people in love. Well, two people in love can fall out of love, and suddenly don't want to be married anymore because marriage is for two people in love, and now I'm in love with someone else. And so if that's the kind of norm that we have, if it's a really restricted, stripped down, like it's just two people in love, then what you could end up with is a social institution that is no longer able to constrain the behaviors that these people need, like to give them the knowledge and the info, but also constrain their impulses so that they don't make big mistakes that end up ruining their marriage. And so then what you end up with is the possibility that if we're deinstitutionalizing marriage, we're making it harder for people to succeed at marriage. And if it's harder for them to succeed at marriage, then it's less likely that they will gain the benefits of marriage, right? So when we talk about the benefits of marriage, and Cox and Dennett want to say these are the benefits of human intimacy, and I say no, those aren't the benefits of human intimacy. Those are the benefits of long-term monogamous marriage, and that's what the research is about. And they're just stretching it to say it's about human intimacy. In other words, it's only for people who get married and stay married to the same person in a relatively well-functioning relationship, where the woman then doesn't end up like struggling with depression because she's so unhappy in her marriage and stuff, right? So these are relatively happy marriages over the long term that reap all these benefits. And the reason why that is because there are social norms and social roles that put pressures on people to do things like not have an affair or not be abusive or whatever else, right? So some of that, that's not the only reason why marriages end up happy, but that's a part of what keeps a lot of marriages moving in the right direction, is social norms and social expectations and social roles. And so if we strip all that away, we end up with a situation where, yeah, fewer people will get the benefits of marriage. And that's why this becomes a big issue, and that's a part of why I don't want to just say, let's talk about human intimacy. I think, no, we need to talk about marriage and how to make a marriage work. And it's true that Cox and Deb, what they're saying, well, if we talk about human intimacy, we'll be helping the married people succeed at marriage. But I just think, no, there's some parts of this that are going to be particular to marriage and long-term monogamous relationships that we'll miss out on if we just talk about intimacy. But we'll get to that later in the semester. Some fun things now. Let's just go on. Oh, one more bullet here. If norms are removed and made less clear, it becomes more difficult there's a word missing, to achieve those norms and resulting benefits. And that's the point I just made. So just some thoughts here really quickly to end on. There are 6 processes of intimacy. The book listed those out, and I just put them up here on the slide. You can pause it here and think about this. The question I want you to think about, I'm going to show the Flight of the Conchords video in class, but the question I want you to think about is, are these 6 processes of intimacy the same for men and women? Or is there any sense in which these processes of intimacy might be feminized? They might be more appropriate for women and female relationships. For example, do men share their hurts and fears of being hurt with each other? Like a bunch of guys on the football team, they've just lost a game, and afterwards they're all opening up and saying, gosh, I just felt I was really hurt when the coach yelled at me for dropping that ball, and I just wanted to cry, but, I could, do guys do that kind of stuff in the same way that women do? And if so, then you're okay. But if not, then you got to be thinking, is this really what intimacy is? Is this how intimacy works? Or is this just a particular type of intimacy? And are there maybe other processes that are also important when it comes to intimacy? That's just a thought. Let's go on. 3 dimensions of intimacy. Again, is this a female notion of intimacy, or does this seem pretty cross-gender, cross-sex, or whatever? There were 3 types of intimacy, and I would just have you think about which one of those 3 are you best at? Which one of those are you worst at? Are you good at all 3? Are there some that you're better than others? So that's an important thing to think about. Do you have a particular preference? You really like to engage intellectually, and that's how you get close to people, and you're good at creating intellectual intimacy. Now, sometimes students don't even know what intellectual intimacy is, so maybe I'll explain that just really quickly here. When I first met my wife, we were friends for a long time before we ever started dating. And I remember I asked her once about, like, when she first met me and what she thought and stuff, and she said, well, I remember you were so I was this Mormon convert, and her mom and dad were the people that wanted to adopt me into their home. Come on over to our house for family home evening and all that kind of stuff, right? So I was over at their house, and family home evening was going to be starting in 15 or 20 minutes. They were running late, and so I was there waiting, and I ended up talking with her mom. So I'm in their living room talking with her mom, and we were talking about different ideas in the gospel and different concepts and things. And I brought up a book that I had read It's a book called Siddhartha by Hermann Hesse, and it's a classic, and it's really a book that Hesse wrote as a way to help Westerners understand Eastern thinking, and it's sort of a book about a fictitious book about the life of Buddha. So it's not the real life of Buddha, but it's sort of like this story about what his life might have been like. My wife was walking down the hall and she just heard us talking about this book Siddhartha, and she thought, oh, he reads books. How interesting. And so she kind of walked into the living room and sat down next to us and jumped into the conversation, and we started talking. And what we found was that we had read many of the same books and really liked them. Our favorite movies were the same. Our favorite speakers at conference were the same. Our favorite everything. Like, we had all these on an intellectual level. We connected so quickly. It was just like, she would mention something and I'd go, I know exactly what you mean, and I'd tell what I thought about it or whatever, and just, that was the first way in which we ever connected. And that for me is a good way to think about what intellectual intimacy is, right? Now, physical intimacy, just to be clear, it doesn't mean that you did something where you have to go confess to the bishop. Physical intimacy is like hugs and holding hands and just any kind of physical connection that helps you feel close to the person, right? And then emotional intimacy would be, of course, sharing emotions and talking about emotions, and be comfortable emoting in front of the person, like crying or being happy or being whatever, right? So all of that would be emotional intimacy. So think about those. Think about which are you best at, right? Oh no, that's just the end. Okay, so we'll leave you with that thought right there, and I'll try to come up with a prompt maybe, but and maybe it'll just be something along with these last things about the different types of intimacy. That'll be fun. So I will see you in class. Bye-bye.